Ulysses S. Grant. Ulysses S. Grant's full name is Hiram Ulysses Grant. He was known for leading the Union Army to victory during the Civil War and was elected president a few years after the Civil War ended. Early life. Ulysses S. Grant was born on April 27, 1822, Georgetown, Ohio. His parents were Jesse Grant and Hannah Grant. He lived on farmland owned by his father, where he developed a skill with handling horses. Grant married Julia in 1848 and eventually had 4 children. In the early years of his marriage, Grant was assigned to a series of remote army posts, which kept him away from his family. Education. In 1839, Jesse signed Ulysses up for the United States Military Academy at West Point, New York. Grant got an average grades and did pretty well in horsemanship and math. He graduated 21st out of 39 in 1843 and didn't really care much for the military. According to Study.com, Grant didn't really care much for the military, thinking he resigned after doing a mandatory 4-year stint. In the Civil War. During the start of the Civil War, Grant was working at his father's leather store. After the war began, he became a colonel of the 21st Illinois Volunteers. Later in the year, Abraham Lincoln made Grant a brigadier general. Grant's first major victory was in February 1862 when his troops captured Fort Donelson in Tennessee. Grant started building his reputation when in July 1863, Grant's forces captured Vicksburg, Mississippi. Soon Lincoln appointed Grant as lieutenant, giving him command of all U.S. armies. He then led the U.S. to victory when Robert E. Lee surrendered. His presidency. Ulysses served 2 terms as the 18th President of the United States from March 4, 1869 to March 4, 1877. According to the White House, Grant provided neither vigor nor reform. Looking to Congress for direction, he seemed bewildered. Ulysses S. Grant passed the 15th Amendment. The 15th Amendment states, "The right of citizens of the United States to vote shall not be denied or abridged by the United States or by any state on account of race, color, or previous condition of servitude." He made the completion of the Transcontinental Railroad possible and annexed Washington state against a claim by the British. After his presidency. After leaving office, he and Julia Grant set forth on a round-the-world trip in May 1877. He was greeted everywhere as the man who saved the American Union. In 1879, a group of people wanted Grant to run for a 3rd term, and he got a reasonable amount of votes at the 1880 convention. In 1884, Grant wrote about his campaigns for the Century magazine and soon began to write memoirs. 1 year later, Grant died of throat cancer in New York. Fun fact. The congressman who appointed Grant to West Point mistakenly believed his first name was Ulysses and his middle name was Simpson, which was his mother's maiden name. Grant never amended the error and went on to accept Ulysses S. Grant as his real name, which is where the S comes from. Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee was a Confederate general who led the South's attempt at secession during the Civil War. Early life. Lee was born January 19, 1807, to a wealthy and socially prominent family. His mother, Ann Carter, grew up on a plantation, while his father, Colonel Henry, was a Revolutionary War leader and a 3-term governor in Virginia. Lee's family hit hard times when Henry made a series of bad investments that left him in debtor's prison. Later he died when he fled to the West Indies in 1818. Education. Lee went to West Point Military Academy for his education. He graduated 2nd in his class in 1829. Soon after he graduated, he lost his mother. According to American Battlefield, with all his military pedigree, Lee had not set foot on the battlefield. Instead, he served 17 years as an officer in the Corps of Engineers, supervising and inspecting the construction of the nation's coastal defenses. Before the Civil War. The first time he set foot on the battlefield was during the 1846 war with Mexico. He fought in this war as a member of General Winfield Scott's staff. He earned 3 brevets for gallantry, and at the end of the battle he was a colonel. From 1852 to 1855, Lee served as a superintendent of West Point. Later, Robert E. Lee joined the cavalry, and in 1859 was called upon to put down abolitionist John Brown's raid at Harper's Ferry. During the Civil War. When the Civil War started, Lee was offered command at the Union Army. Even though he didn't agree with slavery, he couldn't fight against his home state, so he declined Lincoln's offer. He soon left the United States Army to become General of the Confederate Army of Virginia. As general, he appointed Thomas Stonewall Jackson and Jeb Stuart. Even with these talented generals, due to many reasons, one being outnumbered, they lost the Civil War. After the Civil War. After the Civil War, Lee would have been tried and hung as traitor, but he was forgiven by Lincoln. Lee became president of Washington College in Washington, Virginia. He worked there until he died from a stroke in 1870. According to Dexter's, Lee only wanted peace and healing for the United States after the Civil War. Fun fact: Lee earned the nickname Gray Fox because he wore a gray uniform and rode a gray horse, hence gray, and he was smart and cunning, hence fox.